one of the debates that's kind of cropped up recently was around the Chelsea coach Emma Hayes and the furor of the prospect of a woman taking over as a coach in the man's game. Men have been coaching in the women's game. Does it matter which gender is coaching a team of players?
No. When it comes to a coach is a coach, whether it's male or female. It's irrelevant. I'll be honest that I've worked in the States with some phenomenal coaches, and I've learned so much. They've been in the game much longer than I have. They've played since they were children. And they've grown up with the game, and they were phenomenal players, and they are phenomenal coaches. So, a coach is a coach. So, their experience in the game, their education in the game, their key skills of communicators and giving confidence to players and how they organize things and all those things, that's nothing to do with a male or a female. I mean, I think we're a little bit behind in terms of that in the UK. Yes, more female players now have played the game at a very good level. More women are in the game at the younger levels. These women are coming through. We're getting more qualified coaches go through all of the coach education with the FA. So they offer just as much, if not more sometimes, of an insight than men. So I know I think it's Norway, in France, I think even in Scotland, these places have all had women coaches involved in the men's game. So yes, it was a big thing in the UK, but I think it goes back to your first question about how do we change the perception in England specifically, and make that change, because it is genderless. It's not male or female. A good coach is a good coach, and there are some great female leaders, not just in football, but in many facets really, that can teach us a thing or two. So from my viewpoint, because I think of my path to coaching is a little bit different to some, and being out and traveled quite a bit, I have a completely different view and have a different experience to many really. So I see it as my role is to educate and really try and get the word out a little bit more, because it's not to do with female or male. A coach is a coach at the end of the day.
I think one of the expressions from some people who were skeptical about a woman taking that role was the fact that she wouldn't be able to go into the changing room at the end of the match. But that's something that the women's game has had to just deal with anyway.
Yeah, I mean, it's not really a great argument, is it, when you've got male coaches and managers in the female game and have been for a long time and still obviously are and predominantly are. I mean, they're just excuses really, and they're just clutching at straws to think of ways to find why it can't happen. But yeah, you've got to switch it around. We do that all the time. You have somebody come out and say, all clear, and in you go, and you know your times you can go in, you communicate well with your players, you have your captains, and there's ways around it. It's not a big deal at all. So yeah, it's
a non-argument.
Really, no, it's a non-argument. It's not even it's a non-starter.
So we touched on the fact that you have literally worked around the globe, but the first thing I want to mention is get you to talk about how it felt when you were in the opposition dugout to Diego Maradona.
Yeah, that was different, I would say. So that would have been in Dubai. That would have been around, I want to say summer 2011 roughly, and he was at Al Wasl. So Al Wasl is a sports club, it's classed as, in Dubai, and it's in the middle of Dubai. So I was in an Emirates called Sharjah, and we had quite a big sports program built up in Sharjah, and we had a great reputation with our football teams, and we were privileged to be offered the chance to go over there to Al Wasl, and we played. And yeah, he was sat in the opposite dugout watching the game. So he didn't really coach. I think his right-hand man was his translator, if I remember correctly. But I did get to shake his hand and say hello. And after the game, he said, well done. And then he walked off. And that's about as much as it got. But it was a little bit surreal. But then the whole place, Dubai, is a little bit surreal if you've ever been over there as well.
So in terms of the people that you have worked with around the world and some of your achievements, what are your kind of real highlights?
Well, I I guess in the States, I had great opportunities over there. I got to work at club level. I got to work in the female game at collegiate level, which is very different to over in England. So how it works in England is that the kids would typically play for their school teams. They will play for their club teams. They will get to go to an RTC, and then they'll come into the women's game. It doesn't work like that over there. In the States, they play for their high school, they play for their local club, and then they get scholarships and they go to the university. And these universities can have hundreds or thousands of fans watch them at the higher levels. And then from there, they can go into the pro game, really. So that was a fantastic opportunity to take my players right through and see them through to university. I enjoyed working with the university students. While I was over in the States, one of the highlights was one of the things I needed to find straight away is I needed a mentor. So I was smart enough to realize my ego wasn't that big that I needed help. So I was a young guy, early 20s, as a technical director, if you like, of the biggest club in New Jersey at the time. In terms of numbers, we were a club that had the philosophy of a place for everybody to play. We weren't elite. We did have elite teams, but we also had A, B, C, D teams. So we had probably about 15 to 1,800 players in the club at all ages, girls and boys. It was a 50-50 divide. So the only way I could find a mentor was to go on the American Coach Ed courses. And from that just opened up fantastic experiences. So I quickly rose through the courses. And at the end of it, I gained a distinction at the equivalent of an A license, which then offered me a route onto the staff. So I became an NSCAA staff member as a very young guy. But the access that I had to then ex-national team coaches, top collegiate coaches within the women's game. I mean, I would sit eating dinner with these guys on an evening, just listening to every story and going back to my room and making notes. Because over there, you do your coach ed in a week. So you fly in for a week, you educate for a week. And so you spend the whole week together. So that was phenomenal. And that opened doors. I went over to Jamaica to represent the NSCAA. I worked with the Jamaican FA, with the women's national team. And I did a lot of coach education out there on behalf of the NSCAA at the time, which was a phenomenal experience. Working in Jamaica really opened my eyes up. I also, during that time, went over to Brazil, to Rio de Janeiro. I coached over there, and we took a representative team from the university also came over there. And again, that was a phenomenal experience, a real eye-opener in culture and what that was like. So that was a great opportunity. And then from America, Dubai arose, and I ended up over there as well. So I just kept saying yes to opportunities and traveling, really, and immersing myself in the culture and not just the culture of the country, but the culture of football. And they're very well interlinked. The culture of the country very much interlinked with the football and the people that play the game over in these countries. So yeah, I was very fortunate, really. Doors just kept opening. I had no ties or no real responsibilities. So I just packed my bag and off I go. So it was fantastic. The years were invaluable for me, and I loved every minute of them.
So if you can kind of talk us through then some of the cultural differences and experiences that you had in those different places, starting with the States, for example. So what was culturally different? What did you have to adjust to?
I think the work ethic. You don't get many days off. The ethnic mix over there is completely different. When I grew up in Lincoln, where I was up the hill in Lincoln, there wasn't a big diversity. It just wasn't around, people from different countries or backgrounds. You didn't come across it. You learnt about it in school, but you didn't take I certainly didn't take an interest at school because it didn't cross my mind. So when I went to the States, the diversity and the ethnics around it was phenomenal. I was based in New Jersey, obviously, and I was South Jersey predominantly. But it was phenomenal. The Hispanics, the Italians, the German Hungarians, the Jewish people. And what I mean by that ultimately is you have to be aware of their culture and their holidays, because we would cater if there was a Jewish holiday, we would put a camp on for the Jewish holiday. So Yom Kippur, for example. So this was an education in itself for me, really. So you didn't get much time off, because when you were working with the players and the club, you worked Monday to Friday every evening. Your day was your office work. Your weekends were, one day was boys, one day was girls. When you had a holiday, it was clinics and camps. So the only downtime was Christmas, but then you didn't have too much time at Christmas as the players got older, because we'd go to the Disney tournament and we'd play in the Disney tournament around the Christmas period. So I remember it was 5 years with, I can count on one hand how many days I had off in a 5-year period. But you got to remember, I'm coaching football at the end of the day. I'm working in something that I love. I didn't see it as a job. I couldn't wait till my next holiday or wait for the weekend like some people do with a 9-to-5 job. That wasn't it for me. I would go to work and I'd love every minute, as I do now, doing that. So there were some big differences there in the States in terms of that cultural mix was phenomenal. The way their work ethic was an eye-opener, but I was there to work anyway, so I soon fit in with that. The pace of life on the East Coast, I mean, I traveled to the West Coast and you go further south, it slows right down, and then you realize how much 100 miles an hour everyone goes towards New York, New Jersey, and you don't realize it because it's your everyday living. So yeah, it was a real eye-opener, but I loved it, and I'd go back in a heartbeat with that.
So moving to the United Arab Emirates, again, that's a huge cultural shift. And did you have any kind of real experience of dealing with those cultural and faith issues that would impact, or was it a complete kind of baptism of fire, so to speak?
Yeah, it was a big change. You know, I was based at American University of Sharjah, so faculty and staff and people around me on the campus. So how it works in Dubai is typically you live on a campus, and the campus is a walled area that has 2 gates in and out with security. So it's very secure. Not that you need it, it's not for anything like that, but that's just how it is, protecting the students and faculty and staff, really. And so I was surrounded by people from, you know, my neighbors were from Canada, Japan, America. However, I was based in Sharjah, which you have to go a bit by Sharia law and everything like that. So it's fairly strict, and you have to learn quickly with that. And also Arabic. We had a lot of Arabic staff and faculty and so on. So it was a huge change. Dubai is very tourist based, but Sharjah is known more for its education. So it took me a while to settle in how things work in terms of if you need to go through channels, who you ask, how things are done, and how to get things done ultimately, and building up a trust and a staff around you. So it took about 3 months. It was quite unsettling at first, but I'm pretty outgoing. I speak to most people. As you can see, I'm happy to chat. So I soon made friends. I soon had a circle around me, and I soon started to make things happen. And how you dealt with the Arabs versus the Westerners was completely different. But I have some great Arab friends and made some good connections over there. And we just built things, and things moved very fast. What we built in a short amount of time was incredible. And we built up programs and facilities like I've never been able to do anywhere else, really. We went from not having any football facilities, no program, no football whatsoever, to having not only a boys program, but a girls program, which was the first of its kind in Sharjah, that emirate at the time, which made the news. We built 2 FIFA approved 4G pitches that were used for tournaments, a huge program that was respected throughout, and we built a schools program, really, and we built a youth building, which is where all the kids would go to hang out. But again, it took a while for me to get into that, because you needed to understand how it worked with parents. So I'll give you an example of that. So I come from the States, where you have lots of equipment, all the equipment you need. You finish your session, the kids pick the equipment up, you leave the field, it's as you left it, and you go home. And that's what I'm used to. My first session in Dubai was with 30 kids. They came over. They were brilliant. They were enthusiastic, everything. I had cones set out everywhere, as you can imagine. I brought the players in, not thinking. I dismissed them. And instead of them picking up the trash and the equipment, they all just went. And I looked around the field and my equipment was everywhere. There was so much trash, water bottles, paper. You just couldn't believe it. So I was taken aback because I'm not used to this. So the next session back, I finished 20 minutes early and the kids were a little bit confused. And I used that time to educate a little bit on, yes, I bring the equipment, but without it, you can't play. So you have as much use of it as I do. And we certainly don't leave any litter. So they soon got the hang of picking up their own litter and picking up their own equipment. And since that day and that first day of setting boundaries, the kids were phenomenal. It was just something they'd never had to do before. It wasn't their fault. It was just the way that I was going to do things and needed to educate them. And I did have some complaints from parents about their children picking up trash, that they don't do that their maid would tend to do that and the maid would be coming along with them. But that wasn't going to fly. If they weren't going to do that with me, they weren't going to be part of my program. The children were never the issue. It was just an education, really. And after that, there wasn't. So as much as I was getting educated on things, I hope I brought a lot of other things to them as well. We taught them about nutrition. The nutrition was poor. We taught them about discipline, timekeeping, things they weren't great at. And there was a fantastic story about the children really got into the nutrition side of things. And they'd really start asking me about healthy eating and portion size for some of them, because some of them were overweight and they didn't want to be like that. So I would educate and just give them little bits at a time. And they'd come back after the weekend and coach, when I went to the restaurant, I only ate this and I put the rest in a box. And my mum and dad asked me why I was doing this. So I explained. And then their mum and dad started doing that. And so we had this whole change going on. Of healthy eating and portion control, something they'd never come across before. But it was fantastic to see, because that wasn't the intention. It was just a byproduct of what we was bringing to the table, really.
What about the appetite for girls getting involved in a really physical activity like football? The perception might be that there would be a resistance or a non-interest in it.
Yeah, it was tough at first in Dubai. The first girls that got involved were sisters of brothers that were really into football, as it tends to be. A sibling gets involved, another one does. So we only had a small following to begin with. And the reason for that being is girls didn't really play football. Their friends at school would question them why they're playing a boys' game. There was no culture for it over there. So we kept persevering with it. We kept looking at what the obstacles were, how we could educate, how we could get around it, till eventually we built up a program of 3 or 4 girls teams, and they were out playing. They some of them did really well, and we got it out in the national news over there. So it was a big story in the end. It was tough. It was tough because you're changing a whole culture and a perception of a culture with female sports and how it's perceived and how it can be frowned upon by family, friends with it, especially in school. Kids can be quite hard. So, but eventually we opened it up to everybody outside as well, who would come to our program from other schools, and it just grew from there. But yeah, it took some doing, and it took quite a bit of educating and media and being brave, really, for them to be brave as well, to continue with it, and for us to take that step as if we were pushing boundaries, because you do have to be careful sometimes with things you do and how you do it. So that once I got settled into the culture and understood the ways, I felt more comfortable about going with it then a little bit. But I felt it was needed, because there's no reason why the girls shouldn't have been playing football or being involved with it. So yeah, it was great. Don't forget though, we had what really helped, we had a Western mix of girls. So we had children from New Zealand, Japan, England, America, and the Western girls come maybe from a background where they were familiar. So they got involved, which also helped to pull the Emirati girls into it as well. So that helped, which without that, I don't know how successful it would have been. I wouldn't have given up, but it definitely was a key factor.